With a budget year on the horizon, the State House and Senate's senior leadership consider the ultimate policy document the biggest priority of next year's session. At a conference previewing the 2026 session, Speaker David Osborne says Kentucky is in a good position financially, but will be affected by changes and reductions made by President Trump's big budget bill earlier this year.
We will face some questions this budget cycle that we haven't in the past, and I don't think it's going to be a contentious battle. I just think it's going to be a real interesting clash of ideas and opinions.
Osborne says there are several options around the long-term income tax reduction plan after barely missing financial triggers this year. So, Senator Douglas, I'm going to start with you here. From a financial standpoint, he says that we're in a very strong position, but there could be some philosophical differences. Do you think there will be noticeable cuts? I'm not saying, if they're going to be big or small, but if they're going to be noticeable cuts in any particular programs, or you think there's going to be a bigger lean on the rainy day fund as we go into 26?
Well, what I first want to talk about is how the year 25, we did have some natural disasters earlier. And one of the things that allowed some moving back of our revenue collections, especially at the federal and at the state level. So we really don't know right now what our total collections are going to be. There's going to be some speculation. So it actually moves back the amount of time that we had to consider those changes.
Representative Camuel, the budget process starts in the House. What are some of the questions that you think that Osborne is sort of hinting at there you think are going to be coming up?
Well, I'll say this. I see the role of government is to, and our role as elected officials is to make life easier on Kentuckians and to make sure that we want to make it so that they can afford to live in Kentucky. So looking at the prospects of this coming budget, I do have some concerns. And I may not share the same thoughts as Speaker Osborne. In looking at some of the trends that I'm seeing, it looks like we may be actually headed towards more of a recession era look. If we were to cut, I would suggest proceeding with caution before making any kind of additional cut. As Senator Douglas said, we're missing out on some of the federal funds that we've had in the past, but each time we reduce the income tax by 0.5 point, we lose $718 million in revenue, and we're already looking at a $305 million revenue shortfall.
So what would you all like to see happen with the income tax reduction as we go into the next year? From my understanding, I believe there will have to be some sort of vote around affirming the next cut, correct? But Osborne also floated some different possibilities on what will happen next as we continue that march down. The trigger was missed by $7 million out of the overall $15 billion budget. He was wondering, do they waive the trigger in this instance? Do y'all leave the overall formula alone? Do y'all wait to allow the bill allowing quarter-size cuts to take effect? What would y'all like to see happen?
I'll say, again, I would proceed with caution. One of the unintended consequences of doing these 0.5 point or any income tax reduction is it lowers the tax obligation of the wealthiest Kentuckians, but actually pushes down on those who are the poorest Kentuckians, because we have to find other ways to substitute that lost revenue. So, and we generally do that through consumption taxes. So I think what we're seeing, and my caucus just met with John Hicks, the budget director, and in our conversation, it really sounds like this is going to be like this is a gotta-do budget, not a wanna-do. So we're going to have to pick and choose what we're going to do. So, but my hope is that we will push pause and not do any reductions.
Senator Douglas, what do you think?
Well, I'd really like to put the brakes on sounding the alarm. If we just put this in perspective, we actually missed the triggers not by 0.5%, but by 0.05%.
Yeah, 7 million out of overall 15 billion. So,
but that's still 0.05% missing the triggers. We've saved Kentuckians hundreds of millions of dollars. We've allowed them to keep that in their pocket for them to make a decision about how they really want to spend that money. And yet our revenues, as I say, we miss the trigger by 0.05%. So we really wanted our bill to be more of a conservative, slow-paced bill. And yes, we can look at the huge numbers, but we also have to look at, we've had a pretty stable revenue base, a really stable revenue income, and I think that that was what the bill was meant to do.
So you would support, moving ahead with at least going on the path down another cut whenever that would have to take effect. I know that whenever the budget versus whenever the actual cut is affirmed, the timeline there gets a little bit tricky. Would you affirm going ahead and I guess skipping this next trigger?
Well, just again, I want to go back, take a step back, and say that our collection of revenues are behind what we normally, or the time collection for our revenues are behind what we normally have, simply because the time for people to pay their taxes was moved back to November. So we really don't know what our total revenues are, and traditionally we have to make those adjustments along the way. So I tend to take a more conservative look and say, let's before we sound the alarm, let's wait and see what our total revenues are going to be before we have to make those decisions.
Yeah, I know a lot of those discussions are still happening or still yet to take place. So